As you know, the act, that is Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace, it is also known as a POSH Act. Everybody knows, because of the sexual harassment, women suffer not only the physical trauma, but also the mental health is suffered by the women at workplace. As you know, the increasing demand and supply chain, somewhere to balance the life, women have to work, and due to the harassment, the mental capacity of a woman is on the edge. Because of that, in 2000, as you know, everyone knows, I think, about the Vishakha case, and then the Nirbhaya case. After the Nirbhaya, this act came into the existence, and this act itself demands about the policy, so that every organization should, under this act, have the policy of sexual harassment, so that it safeguard the women at the work. So when you make a policy for an organization, whether it is an educational institution or whether it is a company, that is corporate, you have to take into the account why it is needed, why this policy, that prevention of sexual harassment of women, is needed. Good evening. Okay, this basically, this policy is the guidelines or and the procedure which the organization has to comply under this act. Then, what is the IC committee is all about? Why internal committee is necessary for your organization, and what kind of investigation of the complaints of sexual harassment has to has to comply with, and how this investigation has to take place. Then this policy outlines the duties and composition responsibility of the IC member, and how they have to handle and resolve if the complaints come before the IC committee. As well as the regular awareness, that the screening program is also necessary for the employees as well as the IC committee employees for the awareness, whereas for the IC committee to handle, how to handle this complaints if it is put before them. Now, if they are failed to comply with the POSH Act, okay, so what are the legal and financial penalties they have to face? This is all about why the POSH policy is required in the organization, and what is all about the POSH policy. So what are the objective of this policy? As we know, what is this policy? It shows the guidelines, procedure, how the composition of the IC committee, what is the investigation part, but what are the main objective of this particular POSH policy, that is prevention of sexual harassment policy. This policy is basically policies basically seek to create the respected and safe working environment to stop the sexual harassment of women at workplace. The objective of this policy is to the employee should participate in the training and awareness session. So they must know what are their rights and obligations towards their workplace. At the same time, policy establishes the internal committee. So how to handle this internal committee, how they should handle the allegations of the sexual harassment. Plus, the policy frame gives the timeline in what timeline the examination of the complaint should take place, and how much duration, how the complaint has to be handled. At the same time, what is the timeline in which you have to handle this whole complaint. The policy makes sure that the women who report the sexual harassment won't be victimized, because a lot of cases, if the policy is not in the place, okay, so even the women of the organization don't know whether they have to report, to whom they have to report. So the objective of this policy is to make sure that the woman should raise their voice. At the same time, she should not be victimized about it. The main objective of the POSH policy, that it guarantees the women equal opportunity in work and grow without any discrimination of harassment against. So what is internal committee? I'm just saying about the internal committee. Internal committee POSH is required, but the redressal mechanism is the IC. So when the complaint goes to the IC, the redressal mechanism is the IC in this POSH policy, that is internal committee. Internal committee, it was earlier when the act was enacted in 2013. The internal committee is known as internal complaint committee. It shows that its scope or its role is just to handle the complaint. In 2016, 9th May, it is amendment made, and it is known as internal committee. Now the scope is not restricted only to entertain or accept the complaint, but also to resolve the complaint as well as to give the awareness what are the do and don'ts one employee has to observe. So the scope of internal committee is much more vital than the internal complaint committee. Internal complaint committee just used to resolve the complaint, they used to take the complaint, but internal committee not only listen to the complaint but make sure that it should not happen. So the awareness program time to time they conduct so that everybody knows what are their do's and what are their do. So this is now how when you are preparing a POSH policy for any organization, okay? So what kind of a components or content you have to include in the POSH policy? First, whenever you start with your policy, the name of the organization in the first page, and this is about the POSH policy, that is prevention of sexual harassment policy, that first page covers. Then the name of the organization. The second page of the policy start with the introduction. So what should you include in the introduction of the POSH policy? Introduction includes the what is the purpose of this policy, what is the scope of this policy, and what are the applicability of this policy. The scope is extended not only to the permanent employee of the organization, but also the ad hoc employees, volunteers, then the ad hoc base, then the temporary contractual based employees, whoever covers under every individual which is present on the establishment or campus is equally accountable. So in the scope, you have to write it or you have to make sure that this policy is for all the employees. It extended to all the employees, whether it is a probationary, whether it's a trainee workers, okay, whether it is a contract based, whether it's a part-time, full-time, consultant, every employees comes under that who are present in the establishment campus. Clear? So the first and foremost, first point is introduction, where you have to introduce that this policy is under this particular Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act. Then what is the purpose? So whatever be the objective I have narrated, that purpose you have to narrate, and then you have to write the scope of the policy and the applicability on the workplace, and to whom this is applicable, to all the employee who is working into that particular camp. The first point, what you have to include in the policy is the introduction, purpose, scope, and applicability. Then the second point which you have to include in the policy is the definition. Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act has given a lots of definition under this act. So in the policy, you have to narrate all the definitions. So it is clear from the policy to whom it is applicable and what the terminology, legal terminology meant for it. For example, what is the sexual harassment according to the act? Who is the aggrieved woman or complainant according to act? Who is the respondent employee? What do you mean by employer according to the act? What do you mean by workplace according to the act? What do you mean by internal committee, who is basically the redressal mechanism, who do the redressal mechanism? What is internal committee? What is their composition? All those definitions should come under the definition clause. Okay, the policy should define the what constitutes sexual harassment very clearly and provide some examples of the behavior of sexual harassment. So when you narrate, when you write in the clause definition sexual harassment, you have to give with the ample of examples, whatever written in the act, the definition of sexual harassment, you have to give ample example. Okay, making sexual jokes comes under the sexual harassment. There are, the definition says verbal, non-verbal, taking sexual advances, showing pornography. So what is showing pornography? What is the sexual advances? All those you have to give with the examples. You have to elaborate with the examples. Like making sexual jokes is the examples of sexual behavior. Then repeated compliments of an employee's appearance is the sexual harassment. Commenting on the attractiveness of the other opposite sex employee is the sexual harassment. Then discussing someone's sex life in front of a colleague is the behavior of sexual harassment. Then circulating nude pictures or photos of women in bikinis or shirtless men, this comes under the sexual harassment. Then interrogating an employee about their sex life is comes under the sexual harassment. Repeating hugs or other types of unwanted touching, which the employee becomes uncomfortable about, the female especially, that it comes under the sexual harassment. So when you are narrating in the definition clause all the definition given under the act, the what it calls as a sexual harassment, after the definition you have to give ample examples what you mean by sexual harassment. Now, the next clause is roles and responsibility under the policy. What is the role of responsibility of an employer as well as employee? You have to broadly define that. Okay, in that you have to mention what kinds of a do you have to obey and what kind of a don'ts you don't have to do. Like what is the participation activity constitutes sexual harassment. Okay, so when you have given in the definition what you mean by sexual harassment under the act, you have given ample of examples. At the same time, what kind of activity constitutes sexual harassment? So these are the don'ts one has to follow as an employer as well as employee. Then what are the do's they have to follow? So that is the roles and responsibility. Roles played by the employee and responsibility which is taken by the employer. So employer has to do what he has to do, encourage and support the person to reject and raise their, whoever do the sexual harassment, and raise their voice against that unwelcome, uncomfortable behavior. Then what contributes to the speedy disposal of inquiry and lodging the complaint of sexual harassment is the best possible way. That do has to be, responsibility has to be taken by the employer. These all points you have to elaborate in your roles and responsibility clause. What are the do's for the employer? Whatever don'ts are for the employer? What are the do's for the employees? And what are the don'ts for the employee? Okay. Then internal committee. As I told in the beginning, when the act was enacted, it was internal complaint committee. The rule was restricted to only entertain the complaint of sexual harassment, whereas in 2016, when it is named as amendment was made and it names as the internal committee, it means its role is not only restricted to the solving the dispute or complaint, but also initiating or take the initiative for the awareness, so people know that this behavior is not tolerable in the workplace. So internal committee. Section 4 of the act states about the composition of it. So in this clause, you have to mention the internal committee, how it is constituted, what is the composition, who are the contact persons of the internal committee, their name, their email address, their phone numbers, and what is the function of the internal committee. The act narrates all the functions, so you have to, though you have to use the legal terminology, but not as the bare act, whatever written, that function you have to narrate as it is. You have to narrate in a plain English, so the whoever reads the policy comes to know what is the function of internal committee. Then the grounds for disqualification of the members. Act narrates the disqualification of the members, the grounds also. So you have in this internal committee clause, you have to narrate all the grounds which is written in the act. What are the qualification to become a member and what are the grounds on which the members can get disqualified. Now, the next and foremost and very important clause is redressal mechanism, because this clause is the kind of a clause where how, if a complaint comes before the internal committee, what kind of steps they have to take to resolve it. This is the most important clause in your policy. So you have to mention the information of this clause is not limited, but the following information one has to write in this clause. Procedure for filing a complaint with the internal committee. As per the act, as soon as the incident is occurred, you have to file the complaint. But from this incident, whenever the incident is occurred, there is a period that within 3 months you can file the complaint. For example, if a sexual harassment incident is occurred on the 1st of January, February, March, means up to the March she can file the complaint. But extended period is again 3 months. It means within 6 months you can file the or lodge the complaint before the internal committee. Then in the redressal mechanism, there is a procedure called conciliation between both the parties. If in writing the victim, that is the woman, gives that she wants to solve this complaint by the conciliation, she requests, then the conciliation procedure has to be adopted by the internal committee. Then what is the inquiry procedure? You have to narrate according to Act. Whatever Act has given the inquiry procedure, in this particular clause of the policy, you have to write that inquiry procedure. Then what is the interim relief? Means pending the procedure, what kind of a relief is given to the victim according to the Act, that you have to narrate in this particular clause, okay? And what should be the quantum of that? Then timeline to complete the inquiry according to the Act, you have to write that also. Then circumstances, in which circumstances the ex parte order or termination proceedings have to be held, and how you will formulate the inquiry report as per the Act. This all information you have to write in this clause of your policy. So the circumstances in which the ex parte order has to be done is 3 consecutive hearing. It means when the respondent is called upon, summoned upon 3 times and he is not coming or not responding to the summons, then the ex parte order has to be passed by the, recommended by the IC committee. IC committee has the power of civil court, but it is not an adjudicating authority. They can only recommend in their report, they can only give the recommendation, and the action is taken by the employer according to the recommendation given by the IC committee. And when the sexual harassment is such a grave that it really affecting the work culture or work environment of the organization, that it is up to the employer to terminate the employee, as well as if there is no as such, when the written complaint is very necessary from the part of the victim. Till the time she didn't give the written complaint, IC committee cannot work upon it or take an action or start with the inquiry. So at what point of a time, if they comes to know this, that does not come under the sexual harassment, they can terminate the proceedings. Okay. And what kind of, at what stage they have to decide that this is no, the termination, this particular respondent has to be terminated from the services. That point of what kind of action they have to take and which kind of a sexual harassment, that also you have to narrate in this particular clause. And how to formulate the inquiry report, that has to be discussed in this particular clause. Now appeal, when either of the party, it can be victim, it can be respondent, it can be complainant or the respondent, if they are not satisfied with the recommendation given by the IC committee, they have the right to go for the appeal. Appeal has to be filed in the industrial tribunal. Now the records, as the records is very important in this case. So the final report copy, notes, whatever be the agenda of the meeting, every record, interview, evidence, documentation, whatever be the action taken, whatever be the result of the investigation, everything be retained by the IC committee, that is internal committee. These records should not be placed on personal files, okay, unless the complainant results in disciplinary action. If some disciplinary action is taken, then the parties involved in the complaint have to place on the disciplinary employees file. Otherwise, they should have their own internal committee file where they have to take the records of this. When the internal committee pass the recommendation, the copies of the report have to be distributed to both the parties. Even whatever be the written complaint given by the victim, it has to be given to the respondent for preparing the reply and respondent copy to the victim. But at the end, when the IC committee give the recommendation on the basis of which the employer take the actions, both the copy of the report has to be given by the victim as well as to the respondent, but without the recommendation. So they know what kind of a procedure is adopted by the IC committee. Why without the recommendations? Because they should not know what is the recommendation given by them. That has to be confidentially maintained in the file by the IC committee. On that recommendation, the employer will take the action. Then the section is penalty. So this clause is very important clause as far as the policy the prevention of sexual harassment policy POSH is concerned, because company should mention the penalties for non-compliances with the rules and regulation of the company. This head can include the information. This penalty head in the policy should contain the information about the event that constitute non-compliances of the considered as an offense in the organization. What kind of a compliances have to be done by the organization, like annual report. Okay, annual report has to be submitted in the district collector office, or in Mumbai, especially it is submitted to the Women's and Child Development Department. They collect all the annual report, and they give it to the district collector, or in some places of Maharashtra other than Bombay, they directly give that report, submit that report to the district collector. So this is the compliances under this act. Okay, so what is the if the organization don't compliance with this, what kind of a penalties is narrated or given or stated in the act has to be given in this clause. Okay, the offenses may include initiating or participating in the sexual harassment, filing a false complaint with the internal committee, and threatening the aggrieved person. Okay, so what kind of a non-compliances? One is the annual report. Second, if somebody is really threatening the aggrieved person, or doing this sexual harassment, or filing the false complaint with the internal committee, to what kind of a penalty the organization will give to them, that has to be also given. Yes, sir, because we are giving the POSH policies, structure. What kind of a POSH policy one has to make. Don't worry, you will get it into the YouTube. So if you want to recollect or make a policy for any of the organization, you will get a brief idea how to do that things. So even if you don't have any policy format with you, but you have the rough structure and the headings under which you have to give all the information, so it becomes for you to easier to make the POSH policy for any organization. The quantum of penalty for the non-compliances or commission of the offense or have to be mentioned in the policy. So the policy will be very clear about the penalty. At the same time, the action will be taken in the case of repetition of the same offenses, along with the quantum of penalty has to be narrated in that particular head. So there is a clarity about each and every offenses in your penalty head in the POSH policy. Confidentiality. This is a very important heading under the POSH policy, because every information of the company is very sensitive. The company, especially the IC committee, has to maintain the confidentiality, because uh, it safeguard the parties' information, sensitive information regarding the victim as well as the respondent, because after all, it is their reputation. Why should we leak the information and make their reputation so low that they will feel, not to work in the organization? This is not the culture where their, personal image is going to be destroyed. So the confidentiality clause should be in the POSH policy. Each and every POSH policy should contain it. So this information of the parties, the proceedings, the whatever be the action taken or whatever be the recommendation given, the clause is narrated or stated that everything to be confidential in this file. None of the information have to be leaked by the IC member and the employer henceforth. Protection against the retaliation. Everybody knows the retaliation take place. So, clause specifically of the POSH policies focuses on protecting the parties from any form of retaliation. It must state that the company would ensure the parties involved in the inquiry, be it complainant or the respondent or the witnesses, not victimize or discriminate against by any person. So that the person, whether it is a complainant or the respondent, feels safe. Okay, so even witnesses should not be discriminated on that basis that they were the victim, they were the witnesses, or they were the complainant, or they were the respondent. So this clause has to be narrate that protection against the retaliation. They cannot be discriminated against for their role played in that particular complaint by any person of the organization. Then amendments and update. As you know, the act has changed from time to time, some provisions added or subtracted. So according to that, you will review the policy and you will amend according to the act of the state. Alteration point always to be open. That is the reason this amendment and update clause should be mentioned in the POSH policy, that time to time you will review it, you will revise it, you will change according to the act, you will alter some parts, you will amend, you will resign, and communicate whatever amendments, alteration you made in the policy, the company will communicate to their employees. Preventive steps is very major steps, and this clause has to be given the what kind of a preventive steps the company will take when the complaint come before it. So the company will place a copy of policy on the internal website, whatever policy they have, made for the company. I am narrating you all the clause you have to mention in the POSH policy, but what kind of a preventive steps the company is going to take, you have to mention. I have given some examples. You can have n number of preventive steps which you find you have to incorporate in your policy. So the company will place the copy of the policy in their website, plus in the recruitment letter they will mention that the policy is there, this kind of a policy is also there. Then a copy of policy is given to the employees and communicate them the process of how the employer resolved the complaint of sexual harassment. Then sensitizing the employee means giving training them twice in a year, or once in a year, or thrice in a year. Then displaying the conspicuous place in the notice board, the members' names and the contact details, but who is the IC presiding officers, chairman, what is the consequences if this kind of a sexual harassment to take place with them. Then this is the way allowing women to empower, raise their voice and issues of the sexual harassment, and giving them the appropriate forums for affirmative discussion from time to time. This kind of an example you can write in your preventive steps clause in the POSH policy. Can you go ahead, ma'am? This flow chart of the redressal mechanism is optional. It is up to the company whether they want to give the flow chart or not. I recommend you or suggest you please give this flow chart. I have given in a very simple form, but you can give in a very colorful form, so they will get attracted to this redressal mechanism flow chart also. Like incident of sexual harassment take place, if female request, then cancellation. If it is not, then it is go to the sexual harassment complaints go to the internal committee. And if it is less than 10 employee working, then it will go to the local committee. Then report of inquiry take place. If the allegation proves, then action for misconduct will take place. If the allegation was not proved, no action by the employer. And if malicious, if whatever complaint is made is a false malicious complaint, then the same penalty which is given to the male, the same penalty is to given to the female. And if it is parties aggrieved, okay, it can be from the malicious complaint, it can be for the action taken by, then the resort is appeal.
Ma'am, is it mandatory to register IC with any authority?
In company form IC, how many employees required for form IC? If there are 10 or more than 10 employees are working in a company, then they have to form the IC committee under the POSH Act. Who can be a POSH trainer? How many employees required for 10 or more than 10 employees? Who can be the POSH trainer in an organization? POSH trainer, a lot of company, a lot of educational institution, I can say, give the certificate of the POSH certified trainer. Sorry, they give, it is okay, but for a trainer you cannot make a trainer unless and until he or she should have at least some social work background, or he or she should have some law background, because after all it is a labor law aspect. Okay, when a person is an advocate, he can train well because he know the legal aspect very well. But at the same time, if a work person has worked in the social work, he has done a lot of, or she has done a lot of social work and worked on the female issue, he or she can be a good trainer. I am not against those institutions who are providing trainers certificate. I'm not against it, but at the same time, the legal background or social work background is also necessary to become a POSH trainer. There is no
Hello, ma'am.
clause in the law for the trainer, ma'am. There is no clause, Rahul Jain, sorry, sir, there is no clause in a law for the trainer. Is certified trainer is mandatory? No. If a person is advocate and he has done training and he has the legal background, he can train in this act. It's not necessary that the certified trainer has to be mandatory. Amendments in the policy, like whenever you the clause which are written amendments and alteration. For example, when you made the policy in the redressal mechanism, you have not mentioned the timeline period. Sometimes it's skipped. Okay, you have not mentioned what is the formulation of inquiry report, or sometimes you have not written that the IC committee has the power of civil court, but the adjudicating power is also as a part to as civil court. But the IC committee does not have the power of adjudication. It has the power of only to recommend. Okay. A lot of power of civil court it has, but adjudicating power it does not have. So it has the power to just to give the recommendation. So you have mentioned wrongly. So in the amendment clause, you can say, you can write that we have reviewed the policy and this much is we have changed. So every year, if you have made in the first place only you have made the clear cut policy, then the reviewing and amendment is took place whenever the change in the act. Otherwise, no. Okay, but you have to write this amendment clause. So in the future, if you want to review, if you want to decide, if you want to alter, then you have given the clause that you have the right to do that.
Ma'am, a participant is asking if POSH is applicable only to females.
Yes, sorry, but yes, the name of the act itself suggests that Prevention of Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace, Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act. So it is applicable to women only, female only.
So, ma'am, just asking that practically, do you know of any organizations that incorporate a gender neutral policy?
Yeah, a lot of company now, organization now, formulate gender neutral policy. Prevention of sexual harassment policy is a mandate for every organization. Gender neutral policy is up to that organization whether they want to formulate or not for their organization. Mandate, POSH policy is mandate according to the statutory requirement. Yeah,
So
tell me,
I
ma'am.
wanted to ask you that as a minimum 10 female in an organization is required for the internal community formation.
Tenure for the presiding officer is for the 3 years, but it does not mean that if he or she is for the, like, tenure is for the 3 years according to the act. But if the company want to continue him or her as a presiding officer according to the act would be a woman only. Okay, so if the organization want to continue her, it is the prerogative of the organization. They have to pass the resolution under the Companies Act and they can continue that presiding officer for more than 3 years, because though the act says the tenure of the 3 years, but it does not say anything or state anything that it cannot continue after 3 years. So it is prerogative of the organization whether they want to continue that presiding officer, the lady, because according to the act, the female should be the presiding officer. As far as gender neutral policy is concerned, it's a very good policy, so that the men or the male would not feel like this is only for the female, what about us? So gender neutral policy, I think if it is in the place of every organization, it will be a better solution. But at the same time, why we needed this policy, as you know the consequences of the Nirbhaya. Okay, after that this act came into the place, because till date, do we say that we are in the 21st century where the women are at par at the men, but still date, women's females are vulnerable and the exploitation level is much higher than the male. That is the reason government has made this policy as a mandate.
Yeah, my query is that minimum 10 female is required to form a local internal committee.
No, no,
But
no.
what is the 10?
No, it's not 10 required for the internal committee. It just in your organization, if 10 employees are working, male or female, it does not matter. If more
Okay.
10 or more than 10 employees are working, IC has to be formed. Okay, you must have the POSH policy and you have to form the IC committee. An IC committee, minimum members,
What is
composition
the
of IC committee,
composition?
minimum member is 4, maximum depending upon the strength of the organization, employee strength of the organization.
Okay. And for the local committee?
Local committee is
Who are
on
the
the state level. It's not constituted by the organization. It is on the state level. District level पे local committee होती है. If there is no female in the organization, then who will be the presiding officer? Okay, if they have the subsidiary, or if they have the other branches, then for example you have a 4 branch. Okay, so if 3 branches does not have a female, then 1 branch has the female, then she can be presiding officer. Even one IC committee can be take the complaints and resolve it, and the 4 composition, like 4 members you want, to 1 female presiding officer and 3 others, 50% should be female. So if there is no female, you can take the male, but different branches you can take and form the IC committee. It can be initiate the inquiry and investigation. Yes, even if there is no female in the organization, POSH policy is required, because it can be a bystander, it can be a person, female, who comes to your office for sweeping work. It can be a female who come to your office for the recruitment purpose, interview purpose. If somebody do the act of sexual nature or harasses her, then the POSH policy should be there. She can complain to the IC committee of your organization. A lot of case law, but right now I just discuss about the pointers which you have to take into consideration while writing the policy. Does POSH Act also apply to the housemaid? Yes, it is also applied to the dwelling housemaid. Yes, it applies. But
Okay, ma'am.
what about them? So they have to go to the police or the LC. POSH Act applies. POSH policy you cannot formulate for your house. So they can either go to the police or the LC. They have to complain to the LC or to the police. Outside female vendor of organization can complain to the internal complaint committee. They have, for example, outside female vendor in the sense they have connection with your organization, and they comes for something, and your organization people, especially male, have really sexually nature, passes the jokes. This is comes under the sexual harassment, so they can complain to your IC committee.
Thank you so much for such an illuminating webinar. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.